Welcome, everyone, to the Week 9 edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, brought to you, of course, by our buddies at Underdog Fantasy Sports. We're talking waiver wire pickups here on a Tuesday. We got some trade news, some quarterbacks benched as well. All the fallout from all that will be discussed here on the Tuesday edition of the show. Let's hit the music. Again, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, October 29th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me every week, Jake Letarski. You can follow him at RotoJake. We have bye weeks, Niners, Steelers on a bye after, for whatever the reason, week 8 having 0 bye weeks. We have injuries, a little bit receiver, another consequential fantasy asset, at least for our auction team on the NFFC, Jake. That's another one down on the dust after losing Godwin last week, the ramifications of that. And it's another heavy receiver waiver wire week. It's not so much because the receivers are great, more so that the running backs and I think tight ends to a lesser extent are either picked over or often discussed. So we'll dive right in, Jake, to our top 5 waiver wire pickups this week. Who do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a receiver-heavy week because, one, because we have to, but 2, because of injuries and other circumstances. There was a lot of movement at the position, so I'll kick things off. This is the only real priority ad, I think, this week, and that is Cedric Tillman of the Browns. Joe, you had a great call on him last week. I kind of put him in the deep flyer one, but he came out and had a real impactful game. 2 touchdowns, including the game-winning touchdown. We know Jameis is the quarterback now. The team is going to respond. They have new life. It's actually a Browns-heavy show because he's not the only receiver in my top 5 from the Browns or that we're going to mention on this show here. But Cedric Tillman takes the clear number 1 spot for me. Number 2, I'm going with Josh Downs from the Colts. Now, this is kind of the shallow league. You know, we don't discriminate on this show necessarily here. Not everybody's in 16-team expert leagues. So Josh Downs at 47%. He absolutely needs to be considered in this top 5. He's right up there with Tillman, actually, if he's available in your league. The reason being is just before the show, we got an announcement from Indianapolis that finally Joe Flacco would be starting for Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson went 10 for 32, which seems to be really difficult to do, but they found a way to do that anyway, and he has just been largely ineffective. Richardson's always been a project, and this is his real rookie season, and I don't know, more teams need to let these guys sit for a year. And I saw a lot of real early Josh Allen comps with Richardson, but finally the Colts are doing the right thing because they have a team that I think can make the playoffs with competent quarterback play. So anyway, it's better for everybody there, right? Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman specifically, I'm excited for, but Josh Downs was actually fantasy relevant and somewhat effective with Richardson. That's only going to grow here with Flacco. So Josh Downs, number 2. Number 3, I made with Xavier Legette of the Panthers here. We got word just before the show as well, confirmation that Deontay Johnson has been traded to the Baltimore Ravens. So that's one guy down. And then, of course, Adam Thielen is still on IR with his hamstring injury here. So we're looking like a Xavier Legette, Josh Coker kind of deal here. And, I'm picking Legette because, he has been relevant, but before these injuries. And he's got the better draft pedigree than someone like a David Moore, who's out there leading in snap share and route share, but isn't necessarily that effective of a fantasy option. Legette has the draft pedigree and the upside. Number 4, I worked in a quarterback here. Obviously, if you can get Matt Stafford, go out and get him. He's got his weapons back now, as we saw on Thursday night. He got down to 40% rostered after some tough weeks, so I'm getting him. And I'll do a 4B in this case. Of course, that's Jameis Winston of the Browns. Again, he's got this offense humming along a little bit better. I will say with a grain of salt, the Ravens are like 30th against the opposing fantasy quarterbacks. They're giving up a lot of points this year. So Jameis might But he's the one that's more likely to be ready, available, and someone that you might actually think about streaming if you've been cycling through your Trevor Lawrences and Justin Herberts of the world, or even Matt Stafford. It gets interesting here. Obviously,
our 4C has to be covered by Bo Nix too, going against those Ravens as well, who are 30th.
Exactly. Yeah, great matchup for Bo Nix as well. Number 5. This is one where I really struggled. There are like 6 different guys that are equally on the thing, but what ultimately won out for me and why I picked Elijah Moore at number 5 in the countdown was 12 targets. You always follow the targets and the snaps. The Browns only used 3 wide receivers on Sunday. It was Moore, it was Tillman, and it was Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy's actually just below our threshold here, but if you're in a league where Jerry Jeudy is relevant, he's probably rostered in that league. Otherwise, it's kind of status quo. But anyway, Cedric Tillman, Josh Downs, Xavier Legette, Stafford / Jameis, and Elijah Moore are my top 5. Joe, I want to know your thoughts and who you might have differently here.
Yeah, I also have Tillman number 1. Now, if you were listening last week, we had talked about a 10 to 12% bid. In my 16 leagues, Cedric Tillman is a free agent in 0 of them. So I would imagine for most people, at least when I'm doing my waiver wire list, I'm thinking of the deeper formats and the guys that are asking questions right now, targeting that kind of thing. So Tillman is number 1. He should be number 1. But for everyone else who was listening last week, we were aggressive on that one. We got that one correct early on. I think rest of season, you're in a pretty good spot with Winston as your quarterback for the Browns. Along the same lines, it's Elijah Moore that really is effectively my 1A for this week. And you mentioned the 12 targets. I think that slot role along with Jerry Jeudy is a fascinating spot. I did the Wednesday weekly ranking show with Jim Coventry last week. You can watch that anywhere you watch the RotoWire YouTube videos. And he had made the case that he thought the offense would revolve around Nick Chubb. And I said, well, we watched this last year with Joe Flacco for the Browns quarterback, and there was a point where Flacco ended up making our waiver wire award list at the end of the year because he was one of the top streaming quarterbacks that during fantasy playoffs ended up playing. I don't think Winston makes the same reads and can process things as fast as Joe Flacco, but clearly the volume of passing attempts goes up with Winston to the point where I think both Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman on a week-to-week basis in deeper formats need to be rostered. So I'm picking up Elijah Moore in all the leagues in which I missed Cedric Tillman in last week. Unfortunately, I fell asleep on the NFFC wheel where I could have been a bit more aggressive in getting Cedric Tillman. So we're going to correct that issue by getting Elijah Moore. He's number 2 on my waiver wire pickup list. You had listed Xavier Legette, which is probably fine. The draft capital, it makes sense. And again, Deontay Johnson traded to the Ravens. That had been often rumored even last week. And the flags were at least waving earlier Monday. That was like Johnson will get traded. It's to where. So he goes to the Ravens. Panthers get a 5th round pick. They send a 6th round pick to the Ravens. So just a 32 pick change for Deontay Johnson, of course, in the last year of his deal. I think Jalen Coker is the beneficiary of it. We just saw it this past week. Maybe if Thielen comes back, it's a different scenario. But I kind of think the Panthers, who are easily the worst team in the league, are going to just try to see what they have in the young players, whether it be Legette, whether it be Coker. Yeah, you're thinking about it. It's like the Patriots.
The
right
Patriots
up there.
were the other one that came right to mind.
The Saints are also really bad, but they play the Panthers this week. The Saints are going to crush the Panthers. They did it in week 1 too. So
yeah,
I think for sure Jalen Coker is an interesting one and is available everywhere. That's probably like a 1% roster spot at this point, and got a bunch of targets this past week. Now, if Andy Dalton comes back, is Dalton smart enough to just throw to the open player as opposed to forcing it? Yes. Whereas Bryce Young, I was kind of wondering I think Bryce Young makes Jalen Coker better, but that's my number 3 pickup for that reason, is that you're getting those young players involved. Then along the same lines, people are asking about as well too, with Stephon Diggs now done with that ACL tear. It was rumored after the injury occurred Sunday. Who's the pickup? Robert Woods, we'll talk about this more from Jerry Dunabedine's Snap Share and Box Score article on the site. Robert Woods got more playing time, but I think John Mechie has the pedigree and has the opportunity dating back to Alabama and sort of what he would do for this offense to be the beneficiary. So again, deeper formats, Mechie probably available just about everywhere. I like John Mechie a lot in those like deeper rosters.
Mechie was one that I considered instead of Elijah Moore at number 5 in my countdown, with the main reason being is that Stephon Diggs didn't get hurt until late in the 3rd quarter. And then in the 4th quarter, it was Mechie that got the big increase in snaps. Right, so guys like Woods and Hutchinson were playing already and playing kind of poorly. It's Mechie that gets to get bumped in level there. And yes, you're right, he does have a pedigree. He had what was it? There was an illness that made him miss the whole year.
I think
was it cancer? It was something serious.
Hopkins. It's one of the it was cancer. Yes, I don't know, Hodgkin's lymphoma, something like that. It was one of those things. Yeah, I mean, good to see him back and healthy now. And remember, he's a 3rd round pick a couple of years ago to play the slot. I mean, that was why I think you trade for Diggs, because they didn't feel comfortable making Mechie be that guy yet. Well, now he has to be. I still like C.J. Stroud as a quarterback in the NFL. We could debate the merits fantasy wise, with Stroud now missing Nico Collins for at least one more week, Diggs for the rest of the season. But Mechie is one of those, I think, from a prospect profile, you feel very comfortable with. So my top 4, pretty convincingly in some order: Cedric Tillman, well, he's number 1 for sure. Elijah Moore, John Mechie, Jalen Coker. You can kind of mix 2 through 4. And then I threw Darius Slayton at the end. Now, Darius Slayton seems to be getting a bit more work over Wan'Dale Robinson. Watch that game Sunday night. Darius Slayton's a deep threat for the Giants. I also think Darius Slayton could be traded. Giants are also among the teams that are really bad. There is a lot of franchises that need a receiver right now, and Slayton's an interesting one. It's a speculative ad. It's in very deep formats where you'd be considering Darius Slayton anyway. And I already mentioned Mechie and Coker, who are available everywhere. So I don't know a scenario in which you're like, man, got to really dive down now to get Darius Slayton over the other 2 that I mentioned. But top 5 list, I think pretty unequivocally has a combination of Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, John Mechie, and Jalen Coker getting for the Panthers with that trade of Deontay Johnson. Your list has Tillman, but shallower formats where Josh Downs is somehow available. Xavier Legette at 15%.
Hey,
what?
We just got a question in chat not too long ago about picking up, and one of the options was Michael Pittman. Right. So
fine. Yeah, you're right.
So exactly. I had to throw Josh Downs in there because, just because of it's certainly possible for a lot of these leagues. And, going back to it was a pickup question between like Cedric Tillman or Michael Pittman. And as much as Tillman I like and is number 1 this week, I'm still picking up Michael Pittman first. I think Joe Flacco really makes a difference. And I still believe that Michael Pittman is good, and he has been successful volume-wise in the past. He just has not had the quarterback play this year when they've gone with Richardson. And I'm excited for, some of the leagues where I had a lot of Pittman this year, and I had quite a bit of Godwin too. And then T. Higgins was a surprise scratch this week after getting hurt in practice. So like Michael Pittman is my solution in a lot of those. I never let him go. I just hadn't been starting him necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it's a receiver-heavy week again with Stephon Diggs out, Deontay Johnson traded. There's ways to be aggressive about this, and if you are in shallower formats where Michael Pittman was dropped for whatever the reason, it makes complete sense. You would pick up Pittman over Cedric Tillman, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think I would too. I would try to find a way to roster Cedric Tillman as well. I actually think Cedric Tillman rest of the season is one that I really do want to have. I had to start him in Stake League this week.
We don't fully know what Tillman is, and the targets went to Elijah Moore. Whereas we pretty much know what Pittman is, and we know that he can produce and can be successful with a somewhat competent quarterback. So I think Pittman's safer, and the week to week will be a little steadier too.
All right, cool. So again, receiver-heavy top 5 list for the both of us. We did have Cedric Tillman and Elijah Moore. I actually had Elijah Moore number 2 because I think very confidently that the Browns offense will have the passing game going. And frequently, you had Elijah Moore 5, but that's fine. You were talking about some more shallower ones. We named Panther receivers, Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker. Coker benefited a little bit towards the end of last week's game, but the Panthers are miserably bad. It would be a very deep league in which you're considering Jalen Coker, which many of mine are. I had talked about Darius Slayton from a trade aspect from the Giants, but he's also been producing, and Daniel Jones has made Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson fantasy relevant at various times. And from a quarterback perspective, whether it be Matthew Stafford, Jameis Winston, or Bo Nix, they are all on the streaming tables.
I think Joe Flacco sneaks in there just a little bit. There are 4 guys, and we definitely have a quarterback segment coming up here, so stay tuned.
Yeah. I was segueing it to you, Jake, because I think you did a pretty good job getting us all geared up with all those. Again, 2 teams on bye, Brock Purdy and then Russell Wilson from a fantasy perspective. But I have a few questions I list out there in our prep as well for what do you do if you're streaming quarterback. A lot involve Kirk Cousins. So I guess that's a bit of the spoiler. Before we get to the quarterbacks, though, a word from our sponsors, Underdog Fantasy. We're proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy for the entire NFL season. And Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to the popular best ball contest, a few of them, which I'm doing okay in, Underdog also offers great DFS pick'em games. You can pick whether your player will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's games for a chance to win big. And if you've been following along at all this week, there's been a bunch of different boosts for the NBA too, with Underdog getting that set for all those higher and lower opportunities. So definitely check that out. You have a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money in a single night by picking between 2 and 8 players to build a pick'em entry. Sign up with RWNFL to claim your first pick plus free time deposit offer up to 1,000 in bonus cash. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with promo code RWNFL to claim that first free pick plus first time deposit offer up to 1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 plus years older. 20 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 in Alabama, Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms and conditions apply. Conservatively play. Call 800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona 1-800-NEXT STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. All right, quarterbacks from a streaming perspective, it's a pretty deep group this week, Jake.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Steelers and the 49ers on bye. I mean, if you're regularly relying on Brock Purdy or Russell Wilson, chances are it's either a 2-quarterback league or you've been streaming for most of the year anyway. So it doesn't really affect, you benching your main guy or your regulars. But in any case, if you're looking for a quarterback here, there are quite a few out there, both in, we've got our tiers of good guys, our possible streamers, and then our two quarterback league type people that we're going to discuss. Number one for me, among the entire group, I think has to be Matt Stafford. I never really took those trade rumors super seriously. And now that they have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back, and the offense is looking good. They went and beat the Vikings on Thursday night, if you all forgot. Matt Stafford's only 40% rostered. A lot of people cut him around the bye week and when he was struggling here without his weapons. But they're back. They're at Seattle this week. I think he would be my top streamer, my top quarterback pickup. But, of course, 40% rostered means he's out there a lot, and he's almost certainly been scooped up in 2 quarterback leagues. So we keep on moving down the list. Jameis, we talked about last week a little bit. Obviously, he comes out and has a great fantasy game, helping the entire stream group around him. The only thing with Jameis is that it gets a little bit tough schedule-wise. I mean, they have the Chargers this week that are pretty good against the pass, and then they have a bye week here. So I could very much understand a situation in which, you're picking him up and cutting him right away, or if you don't need him, you let someone else have him, and then wait to grab him when someone else cuts him for the bye week. So that's up there. Bo Nix, our cover boy, we have to give him his own spot after he gets a 4-touchdown day. Right, he even though he's not our number one pickup, we don't pick the cover necessarily. I guess he was just too handsome to exclude from the cover this week. But his last 4 games, 32.6, 15.7, 24.9, 25.2 fantasy points, and the rushing attack definitely helps there. And then, of course, right before the show, I was going to mention in this section a speculative ad on Joe Flacco just based on how bad Anthony Richardson was this week. But before the show, of course, we got the news that Flacco will indeed start Week 9 against Minnesota, whose defense just got torched by the Rams this past week. So Flacco is interesting. He's a definitely viable streamer here, but I think Stafford's on a tier of his own. And then you're looking at guys like, do you need it for 1 week or do you want rest of season? Because rest of season, probably Flacco. 1 week, Bo Nix has a pretty good matchup at Baltimore, who Winston just torched this week. So maybe he sneaks up in there, but Jameis is also an exciting player to add as well. So anything to have before I kind of move on to the next here?
Yeah, so I posed a couple of questions because I have to deal with this and effectively weed you in one of our formats. So would you stream Bo Nix again against the Ravens defense, who's a lot of points, but I kind of think it's a little bit of a gimmicky offense for the Broncos and a little bit more reliant fantasy-wise on Bo Nix running against the Ravens? Or would you play Matthew Stafford against the Seahawks?
It would be Stafford for me.
Okay, and then conversely, would you play Stafford over Kirk Cousins, who goes against the Cowboys this week? Obviously, Brock Purdy took care of business against the Cowboys. Purdy's far more mobile. I think Purdy's been playing excellent, by the way. That's a underreported story with how bad how banged
up the receivers have been. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Kirk Cousins or Matthew Stafford against the Seahawks, Cousins against the Cowboys.
Yeah, that's a real tough one because Cousins has been hot lately, and I actually have to choose between Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott in Dynasty every single week. I still think that I'm leaning Stafford, but that gets a lot closer. And the question may be irrelevant because Cousins is rostered in 66% of leagues now. So it's basically if you already have Cousins, if you're deciding to pick someone like Stafford up. And if you already have him, I guess I generally kind of stand pat and maybe just keep Cousins out there. But if you're picking one to stream, I like Stafford. It's pretty equal this week, and I like Stafford much better rest of season. So
yeah, that's true. Now with Puka back, Cooper Kupp theoretically not being traded, those NFC West games get really weird, especially Rams-related ones, whether it be Seahawks or 49ers. I guess Cardinals mixed in too, which has me hesitating just a little bit. Not that I think Stafford will be bad, but you're kind of saying it's the same thing. I mean, Kirk Cousins lacks any mobility, so does Matthew Stafford. All the production is from a passing perspective, and all those guys now are back for Stafford, so he becomes right in that echelon of streaming quarterback range. Somebody in the chat asked, and I think it's fair, Flacco or Jameis Winston in Superflex rest of season? I think my answer is very clear. I'm curious what yours is, though.
So this is actually a very, very good question rest of season. I think that I'm going to lean Jameis in this case here because Jameis, we know it's his job rest of season, and we know what type of at least fantasy player he is. Kind of an aggressive gunslinger. He's going to dig himself holes and then pass his way out of them and continue to get more consistent. Whereas the Colts offense, if they're running like they want to be, I think they're a run-first team. And I think Jameis just has more pass attempts and volume will be better for fantasy. And we also, if the Colts go lose 4 or 5 more in a row, will they throw Richardson back out there?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess, and I still like Flacco rest of season. I'm just trying to think of, there are more scenarios in which this works out better for Jameis than Flacco for the rest of the year,
I think that's exactly the reason I'd be picking Winston. The only scenario where Winston gets replaced by Dorian Thompson-Robinson is if Winston gets injured, which is a possibility, of course. I think anybody is. Whereas I think there are absolutely scenarios, however remote they might be, there are scenarios in which the Colts kind of feel like they have to go back to the guy that they drafted number 4 overall and Richardson just 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I don't think benching Richardson is we've given up on him, although this is a pretty damning remark to do so here in week 8 or week 9. It's I need to save my job if I'm Chris Ballard and the rest of the staff to play Joe Flacco, and that will work. Flacco is a better quarterback. He's going to help them win more games. I think it's possible that if they were to lose games, and I would assume it'd be Ballard gone before Shane Steichen, the head coach. Somebody would have to lose their head for losing the way they would be, and I think it's Ballard. So I would assume Shane Steichen would go back to Richardson at some point if they have fallen out of the playoffs. But they're certainly in the thick of things. There's going to be at least one bad playoff team, whether it be the Broncos or possibly the Colts, that's going to win that 6 or 7 spot for the AFC this year. And I think Flacco certainly helps put them in position for that. So I'm Winston easily rest of season for me in Superflex formats.
Yep. All right. Absolutely. So if you're tempted and you see these guys on your waiver wire and you might want to pick up these players, I'll make a case kind of against all of them here. Trevor Lawrence at Philadelphia might be a good idea, but he just lost Christian Kirk for the year, and Brian Thomas is day-to-day with the chest contusion, and Gabe Davis is also banged up, even though he should be fine there at Philadelphia. Don't love that as a streaming matchup. Aaron Rodgers home against Houston on Thursday Night Football. Rodgers himself is a little banged up on a short week here with a line that cannot protect him. I don't trust that in the least bit. Justin Herbert, 43% at Cleveland. I actually kind of like Herbert. I don't know. He's got something going in McConkey. I think he could fall into this. He's the closest out of this group that would fall into the guys we just discussed as far as rest of season consideration.
Yeah, and I probably should have mentioned this for the receivers, but DJ Chark will likely be back this week for the Chargers too. I don't know what that really means. I don't know if he adds a whole lot to the offense. I don't think the offense wants to pass anyway, which is why Herbert is rightfully completely out of that tier in my mind, even if he's the best of the bunch. But Chark should be back for that offense. He's missed the past 2 weeks, have been on the could be activated, will he be activated train. He should be activated, I assume this week, given all the injuries the Chargers have.
Exactly. Yeah, that wasn't necessarily an intentional omission for me either, but I'm going to take a wait and see. I'm not really
it's fine.
There's so many receivers out there that are going to go ahead on the order that I'm not really putting any kind of stock into Shark this week. And then we have 2 quarterback leagues, right? Drake May has a concussion, which means they could go back to Jacoby Brissett. They're at Tennessee this week. That's kind of an ugly situation. Jordan Love, of course, left the game with what they called a groin injury, but it was pretty obvious early in that game that he landed on his knee weird, and it was the same knee that he missed time with earlier in the season here. So I don't know what all this talk of a groin injury is, but either way, Malik Willis would take over for him. And Malik Willis is actually a decent super flex option just of what he can do with his legs. I mean, they don't ask him to throw the ball a bunch, but when they needed him to on Sunday, he stepped up when made a big play to Jaden Reed downfield that led to the game-winning field goal there. So Malik Willis has been an effective fantasy option in Superflex. He's certainly better than whoever's starting for Tennessee and a handful of these guys at the bottom of the tier here. So and then speaking of bad quarterbacks, the leash on Daniel Jones is shortening. Brian Daboll actually had to come out and say that he is starting Week 9 against the Commanders. The fact that he has to come out and say that is never good here. Drew Lock is the backup there. I'm not sure that would be that much better, if you're a Neighbors holder or anything like that. But also Daniel Jones didn't get a lot of help. I mean, Neighbors let a catchable. He had a bad drop. late in that game. He also had a very catchable ball, just kind of get away from him. Daniel Jones wasn't getting too many favors from his teammate there, but just a couple of speculative backups to think of for your deep superflex leagues.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be if you need to be reliant on Daniel Jones and the Giants overall. But that's why I had mentioned Darius Slayton. I think they're sooner to consider trading him, but he's one of those options from a receiver perspective that's interesting if Locke becomes quarterback as well, too, because I think the volume of passing attempts goes up a little bit more if and when Drew Lock ends up being the starter for New York. So before we get to the running backs, again, unfortunately lesser running back period from a waiver wire perspective, which is tough because you were starting Jordan Mason, you're starting Najee Harris, possibly even Jalen Warren. What do you do with those two teams at bye? We'll get to the options that are available after this word from our sponsor, Circa Sports. It's football season. The best place to catch the games is, of course, at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. It's featuring the best pool in history. Of course, the Stadium Swim, 3 levels, 6 pools, and a 143 diagonal screen, whether it's Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I'm sure there's going to be a Wednesday game at some point, at least collegiately. Stadium Swim is America's favorite place to watch football. No matter the size of your group, Stadium Swim is the place for you. And from the owner's suites, the cabanas, day beds, the stadium booths, there are seating choices for everyone. And the best part, it's open 365 days a year with the temperature-controlled pools. It's a great place to catch games all season long. It's 80 degrees here in Wisconsin for October, but in about 3 weeks, it's going to be 20 degrees. I would love to be Circa Sports at that point and at least be participating in the Stadium Swim. It's located at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Book today at circalasvegas.com. Again, the running back position, pretty similar to last week in the event that there's effectively nobody that you're excited to roster this week.
So I mentioned in my promo tweet that I did that I would say I'll run over running back tiers, and we kind of did this casually last week too, but we'll just kind of we'll do it once again here, for anyone that's new this week, and because it is a pretty similar group here. If you need to pick a running back up and start him this week, there are no breakout candidates that are suddenly readily available here. You first want to look at guys, there's one tier that I place them in, and I call them backups that still get work. That's your guys like Tyler Algier, who is still underneath our threshold. He is backup to Bijan Robinson, clearly, but you can typically count on him for 5-6 fantasy points a week. Braylon Allen of the Jets has been in that group, despite how generally disappointing the Jets have been, and he's even lost a little momentum. But he's still someone that'll at least get you a few points a week. You don't take a zero here. On top of Braylon Allen, the other one that is in this list here that is maybe sneaking into this list is Kamani Vidal of the Chargers, because it wasn't a great fantasy game, but he did get 6 carries last week. And, of course, J.K. Dobbins is the main show there. We're not looking any closer to Gus Edwards coming back. So it's 6 carries, 17% snap share. But the difference with Vidal and these guys is that he's super talented, I think. And I also think that if just anything happens to J.K. Dobbins, there's definitely a much greater increase in what you will expect from him. He will be our cover boy and dump all the rest of your fab on him for the rest of the season if anything happens to Dobbins. But unlike guys in the tier I have below, the Ty Chandler, Zach Charbonnet, Blake Corum tier, those guys aren't necessarily getting work unless their starter gets injured. Guys like Algier, Braylon Allen, and even starting to be Kamani Vidal. He's like right on the end. He wants to be in one of those tiers, and he's starting to work into one. So I guess those are the names you're looking at first. If you need a 1-week streamer to get you 5 points, you look at the top tier. If you need a guy that you don't want to waste a bench spot and have a high upside player, then you go to one of those players. Like I said, I'll repeat them again. Your Ty Chandler, Zach Charbonnet, Blake Corum here, and Vidal's. He's back and forth between those tiers, but he might, but he might be able to sneak into the upper one.
Reminder that Gus Edwards is now on the second week of his 4-week injured reserve stint. It could be a little bit longer. That'll be one of those instances where if J.K. Dobbins were to get injured, it's effectively only 2 weeks of Vidal being the main guy. And I think Vidal would then split time with Edwards. Maybe even Edwards have the lion's share again, like 14 carries, Vidal 12. But Vidal would obviously be better with those like Dobbins was earlier this season. So it's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah. I think there's a chance Vidal can just keep working his way up And,
Yeah.
getting just enough, 6 to 8 carries a game is just enough to keep around on the roster just in case. You definitely want him if you have Dobbins and you have the space for him.
You had mentioned Blake Corum. Obviously, Jalen Wright for the Dolphins would factor into
that's
that
another
too.
good
If
one.
Raheem
Yep.
Mostert gets injured or if Devon Achane gets injured. Trey Benson's another one. James Conner has been healthy all season long. That's not going to happen for the Cardinals. At some point, there's going to be a situation where Trey Benson becomes fantasy relevant. The issue is we had 0 bye weeks last week. So there was no real need to cycle through roster stuff, and only 2 this week. Then we have 4, and I think 4 for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yep.
And then the roster spaces get tight then too. So it's really tricky. Obviously, if you had the Stephon Diggs or Chris Godwins of the world, you're getting rid of them because they're done for the season.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, it's a hard spot to be.
Yep.
We're going to end up having a scenario. And what I'm telling people right now is, because there isn't a lot of running backs to discuss, if you have a second defense or a kicker, you have 2 kickers, whatever else, you need to just take your lottery shots with these guys. There is going to be one of the Jalen Wrights, Trey Bensons, Blake Corums of the worlds that are available, and you should be picking them up every single week. Even if you drop them that week, it does not matter. You're just trying to get a lottery ticket to hit at one point here, and I think that matters here. So, Yeah, Scott says 6 on bye in week 12 and week 14, right? And week 14, of course, being the last week before fantasy playoffs for a lot of folks. Thanks, NFL. I hate you for doing that, as always. But one of those things to keep in mind if you are kind of shuttling through roster spots.
I can already think of a couple leagues where in drafts, I was like, I'm going to take 8 players with a week 12 bye, and then I only have to punt 1 week. And then, of course, naturally, in these leagues, I end up in a spot where, I can't actually punt this week and expect to make the playoffs. So we'll definitely help you there. After those basic tiers here, I had to get real creative to get some running back names to talk about it, but there are definitely some names that we might have hit. First, I want to borrow one from the Nick Whalen, Jeff Erickson sneaky ads special here because I thought it was some creative thinking. And they're talking about Saints backup running backs versus Carolina. One, Kamara is usually only playing 50-60% of the snaps, so there is room for a guy like Jamal Williams to vulture a touchdown. There might be room to keep monitoring Kendre Miller to see if he gets involved. He was
traded.
Yeah. Kendre Miller's been a name that has came up, I feel like, on this show a lot in kind of that lottery ticket area here. So you can look at something like that, but they are playing the Panthers, and there's a good chance Derek Carr's coming back this week, so the offense will look far more competent than it has been with Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler. So you're assuming a blowout, possible garbage time, trying to predict that. I know it's oftentimes a trap to get into this, but if you're streaming a running back this week, these guys are pretty readily available and could get some garbage time work. So good call by Nick and Jeff there. I wanted to reiterate that it was very relevant for our show here. The next guy on the list here is a touchdown vulture, Roschon Johnson here. I know he's been a listener favorite for quite some time here, but he has 4 touchdowns in his last 4 games. So even though DeAndre Swift is still productive, this Bears offense is getting to a little bit more of a rhythm. Not so much this week, but Roschon still scored. He's got a great upcoming schedule here. He's
He's already at Washington. And I guess while you're looking at this, thank you, Bears, for not having Roschon Johnson score 5 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. As a Packer fan, I love to see that backup offensive lineman get that handoff at the 1-yard line. That is the best case scenario for the Green Bay Packers, which is all we care about on the show.
Exactly. And then, so then he's at Arizona and at New England. So it's a really good upcoming schedule here for Roschon Johnson and the Bears running backs in terms of and I put those ranks. They're 29 and 30th against opposing running backs in half PPR formats here. So at Arizona, home against New England. Then he's got the Packers, who are middle of the pack, but we're looking at 29 and 30 over the next couple weeks. I can think of worse desperation starts. One more guy I wanted to throw in is Jaylen Warren, because he's technically below our threshold at 46%. He had 11 touches for 63 yards on Monday Night Football. Excuse me. The problem is that he's on a bye week this week, so he can't help you this week. And it's real tough to roster someone like that when they're on a bye here, even though there are only 2 teams on bye. So wanted to sneak him in there because Najee is still the clear RB1, but Warren, now that he's healthy, is getting work, and he's getting third down touches, and he's getting receptions. So that's worth it. And then, man, if we're really, really desperate, Rico Dowdle was out this week for the Cowboys, so Dalvin Cook is playing, but the results just aren't super promising. 29% snap share, 6 rushes for 12 yards, and caught his only target for 10 yards here And, how much of that is just because Rico Dowdle was out. So,
Right.
really, really stretching for new names in the running back area here. But, you're going boring with a guy like, Algier or Braylon Allen if you can,
Yep.
just to get points here probably, because that might be the case for a few people this week.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we actually went pretty heavy at receiver at the top of the show. For the new listeners, we'll help you prioritize what to do with the Stephon Diggs injury and obviously the Deontay Johnson trade, what that means. But first, a word from our guy, Nick Whalen. We just talked about him earlier with the smart call from the Saints backup running backs. We'll hear what he has to say about DK Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, we're back and talking receiver. Again, for those who missed the top of the show, our effectively our top 5 waiver wire pickups were some iteration receivers, whether it be Cedric Tillman, who we think very confidently will be not to this level, 2 touchdowns, 80 receiving yards every single week, but very comfortably involved in the offense. Same goes for Elijah Moore to a certain extent with Jameis Winston as your quarterback. You had liked some of the shallower guys like Josh Downs. Even Michael Pittman was asking on the show. Now with Joe Flacco as your starting quarterback. I had talked about Jalen Coker, who I think is one of the guys that steps up with Deontay Johnson now traded to the Ravens. Obviously, there is Adam Thielen, who will likely be active off injured reserve. It's possible, but if you're the Panthers, one of the worst teams, if not the worst team comfortably in the league, just see what happens with the young guys. We never talked about the ramifications of Deontay Johnson going to the Ravens. It hurts Zay Flowers to a certain extent, I think. Rashad Bateman now becomes a borderline droppable guy, and it's frustrating because for the past 3 weeks, you could actually start him if you needed to. I don't see a scenario in which the Ravens can facilitate 3 receivers plus Mark Andrews week-to-week fantasy-wise and Derrick Henry. They're a good offense. They're not that good, though.
I think I don't have the exact data on this, but aren't the Ravens like right up there in the top of the league in terms of running 2 tight end sets because they have
close
Andrews
to
and
it,
Likely? Yeah. So they have to be right up there near the top, and that means only 2 guys are out there on the field. So, yeah, you're right. Bateman is probably, unfortunately, the one that suffers in that situation here. I do want to quick, we covered the Browns at length. There are a couple points on the Houston wide receivers I wanted to make following the Stephon Diggs
news,
ACL tear. Obviously, John Mechie made your list. He was really close to making mine. I ended up going Elijah Moore, but it's so there are a couple things here. So it was non-contact injury late in the third quarter here. We now know he's out for the season. Nico Collins is out through at least week 9. I want to just summarize. In the fourth quarter, Robert Woods took 68% of the snaps, 63% went to Xavier Hutchinson, and 47% went to John Mechie. But over the course of the game, he was the one that came in and got the biggest boost in playing time after Stephon Diggs. So that's why people are on him, as the guy you actually want, because Woods and Hutch were playing and just not really doing much. Mechie came in and immediately got targets here. Because at the end of the game, Mechie ended up with 4. I keep going back and forth between Mechie and Mechie. I want to say
let's do Mechie, so then you can at least be consistent with me and we can both sound stupid if that's the case.
Yes.
It's wrong.
All right, exactly. I'll take him for the team. Mechie had 4 targets, two targets for Woods, who basically played the entire game, and 1 target for Hutchinson, who also basically played the entire game here. So if there's a fantasy relevant option, it's Mechie. this week is a pretty bad matchup. It's
Correct.
a short week against the Jets. We don't like that this week necessarily. They've been, we've constantly said on the show and out in real life, defense hasn't been the problem over there with the Jets. So they're solid. But after that, things really open up. They're home against Detroit, 30th overall. They're at Dallas, 11, versus Tennessee, 5. So not that great, but Tennessee's not.
Can I pause you there? Because I think already it's the Jets this week. Then who's next week?
The Lions.
Okay, so the Lions, and then after the Lions,
Cowboys.
All right, so by that Cowboys game, I guess the battle for Texas, Nico Collins is back, and I think that bumps Xavier Hutchinson out, and it would be Tank Dell and Tank Dell and Nico Collins. That's where I go back to. I'd rather have Mechie over Xavier Hutchinson or Robert Woods, because Tank Dell plays an extra Y. You have Nico Collins extra Y. That slot role was Diggs's, and now it's gone. Maybe it's Dalton Schultz that benefits.
Exactly. Well, early in the year when Collins and Diggs were playing, it was Tank Dell that was getting phased out in the 2 wide receiver sets there, right? So now Dell bumps to the top, and then it's Collins and Dell, and then maybe not much. Maybe Mechie's the guy that stays in for Diggs, but yeah, exactly. So it's a shorter term utility for Mechie, but I still think that over that short term, he's the one that you want out of this group here. So that's all I got on them. We mentioned the Panthers a little bit. I got a couple deeper cuts that I guess we can hit. Anything else on the Browns, Panthers, or
Cedric
Texans?
Tillman certainly is viable. We talked about last week. I mean, you could go over my conversation last week as to why Cedric Tillman is somebody I want. Jerry Jeudy obviously as well. I'm for sure buying Elijah Moore. Like, there's a prospect profile part of this, but it's more that I think the offense is attempting 35 passes a game. I just think they're going to be passing frequently. Maybe
I'm buying
Njoku
12 targets.
Maybe Njoku takes away some of those. Of the 3, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore, Moore's the one I'm most concerned does not get 12 targets a game. But even if it's 6 or 7 targets a game, I think that's enough for this offense to be
maybe there's something
factor.
there. But I just the only problem I have with the Browns is that we're really saying that there are 3 startable fantasy receivers and a startable fantasy tight end on this offense week to week. That's got to be a lot of pass attempts, and that's a lot of hopefully Jameis digging his way out of holes with late game miracle comebacks. That would certainly be fun. But I think somebody each of those weeks is going to get tamed down a little bit here, and I'm not sure who it is, and I'm worried it could be more in some of those weeks.
I think it might be Jeudy. If I'm being completely honest, Cedric Tillman is a thing that Winston was looking for him, especially in critical moments, matters a lot to me. And maybe if you're the Browns, you can move Jeudy around to do the Elijah Moore routes. But I kind of just think it's going to be Jeudy that takes the grunt of this. It's also possible it's Nick Chubb. I truthfully think that is the rationale, that you're going to see the Browns just run less. And why wouldn't you? I mean, the guy is coming off a very serious knee injury. I love Nick Chubb. I love him as a fantasy player, but also what he means to the Browns. That's great. Doesn't mean he has to be a guy that is consistently getting 20 plus carries a week. Maybe the offense is just completely different. I mean, that's the other sell of this is Browns defense not as great as we thought. And also in a more up-tempo thing with a quarterback that wants to throw the ball. If you're moving the ball, getting yardage, again, 7 or 8 targets is totally fine, even if it's not 10 or 12 like Moore's been getting close to it. So give me the deep cuts for receiver, because I think it's worth mentioning.
So there's one that the only guy I could really see mention this was our own Jim Coventry. So shout out to Jim. He brought up Parker Washington of the Jaguars, who is completely available everywhere. That is because Christian Kirk is out for the season with a collarbone injury. Brian Thomas, I love him rest of the season, but he's considered day-to-day with a chest contusion. And Gabe Davis has a shoulder injury. He should be fine, but we'll see how much these guys practice this week. This week, Washington led in snap share and route run rate and was second on the team in air yards. And the Jags upcoming, they're at Philly 21 versus Minnesota, and at Detroit, who are all Minnesota's 32nd against receivers in half PPR, and Detroit is 30 against receivers in half PPR. So we've got a really banged up team, a funnel of targets that has to go somewhere. I think the tight ends are going to get this. Evan Ingram's going to benefit a lot. If you want a real deep cut tight end, Brenton Strange might get involved. He caught all 5 of his targets against the Packers here. So there's volume available somewhere in Jacksonville where if you get a surprise like me and have to bench T. Higgins late, the one player that'll be sitting out there might come from the Jags for you. So I threw that out there. And then, again, nobody likes recommending Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, but he does have a 98% snap share and 95% route run rate, which is both above Calvin Ridley. Of course, Ridley had a really good game this week, got all the volume here, but Nick Westbrook-Ikhine ended up catching 2 of his 4 targets for 39 yards and a score. In desperation, that might be an option that you have to turn to.
Hey, if you got Cade Otton on National Tight End Day, raise your hand. I would have had a fantastic fantasy outing across my 16 leagues if 33 points from Cade Otton didn't crumble me in a few of them. But if you've been listening to this podcast over the past couple of weeks, Cade Otton should not have been available. That was one of our recommended guys, of course, not way past the threshold.
Yep. He's up to 63%, but there was a good 3 weeks in a row where he hovered between 30 and 40%. And it was thin weeks for tight end, as we just said, hey, man, Cade Otton should be your first look up. And if not Cade Otton, then Hunter Henry, who also has been having a nice stretch.
Yeah, we were wondering, was it Jalen McMillan? Was it Sterling Shepard? Was it Trey Palmer? Ended up being Cade Otton, who I think now rest of season vaults into that Tucker Kraft range, that Dalton Kincaid range, that Sam Laporta range of like tight ends 6 through 10. You knew Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid were going to be drafted that high. Cade Otton, Tucker Kraft kind of surprisingly have risen to that ranks as well too.
I have a dilemma big time in one league where like I have Njoku, that's who I've been starting. That's who I started this week, both with Cade Otton on the bench. Even Njoku still had 16 fantasy points and is going to continue to be solid, but now I got to find a way to get Otton into that lineup here while I'm also holding TJ Hawkinson on my bench. And I just wanted to throw out a public service announcement here that 73% roster for TJ Hawkinson. Unlikely he's available, but if you're in a league without IR spots and someone had to make a tough roster decision due to last-minute injuries, just remember that TJ Hawkinson would have been a top 5 tight end ranked coming into the season if he were healthy here for the Vikings here, and that'll open up a lot in that offense. So throwing that out there. And then beyond Otton and Hunter Henry's he's down at 39%. So, there's still some availability there, but I'm really only interested in him if Drake May clears concussion protocol. Hunter Henry was not really worth holding rostering, let alone starting when Jacoby Brissett was the quarterback, and Hunter Henry will definitely be going back to my bench in my deeper leagues if Brissett ends up starting this game. Then on top of that, there's one name that came up a lot of times this week that I think is kind of worth addressing. You're the Chargers guy, so you can tell me what to think here, but Will Dissly caught 5 of his 7 targets for 41 yards. I believe that tied J.K. Dobbins for the team high in targets. And
I would have thought McConkey would have more targets, but okay. It's fine.
Yeah. Maybe I interpreted wrong. I'll double check that in a second. But Dissly now has so many targets over the last few games here. And, of course, that is with Hayden Hurst, once thought to be the starter. He's now missed back-to-back games with a groin injury. So Dissly is getting into the conversation here. McConkey actually only had 6 targets.
He just caught all 6 of them for 2 touchdowns.
He just caught all 6 of them for 111 and 2 touchdowns. The run after the catch on that McConkey touchdown was beautiful. Yep. That was one of the cooler plays this year. I was like, he's actually going to score. And considering where he first caught that ball. So just a shout out to him. He's looking like he is the real deal. Even though Simi Fehoko is leading them in snap share.
Yeah, I'll throw some water on the Dissly thing. It's the Chargers operate with so many tight ends typically that when Hayden Hurst is healthy, you're more assuming Hayden Hurst is the receiving tight end, Dissly is the blocking tight end. They very much platoon that position, but because Hayden Hurst is out, it's just throwing that over Stone Smart or like Tomlinson.
Yeah, it was Dissly and Tomlinson this week, and Dissly only played 67% of the snaps.
They're Jag level tight ends, so by default, Dissly gets more involved. When Hayden Hurst is healthy, it becomes split more. I actually think like a Zach Ertz is the one I would look at instead. I would imagine is close to that 50% threshold. But if you're replacing Freiermuth or George Kittle, you can do a lot worse. I'm gonna just say it. I've been wrong for the first 8 weeks. But if we're gonna remind folks that at running back, Blake Corum, Trey Benson, Jalen Wright are all interesting because there's a lottery ticket. Ben Sinnott is going to be a fantasy factor if and when Zach Ertz gets injured. Zach Ertz got 12 or 11 targets against the Bears last week. Just imagine a guy that doesn't run a 5 flat 40 catching those 7-yard out routes or ins or whatever it is for that Commanders offense. If you can do it, if you have a deep enough bench spot to be able to roster Ben Sinnott, again, 3rd round rookie for the Commanders, I'm just salivating at what could happen in the fantasy playoffs if Zach Ertz gets injured. So I'm going to victory lap this at some point, even if it's week 17.
Mm-hmm.
Jake, I'm going to do it. But Benson, I'd be considering as well, too. He's probably at 0% rostered as well.
Yep. All right. So that's a wrap for tight ends here. I did mention Brendan Strange in the last one, just because there's how did Coventry put it? Like a target vacuum or a target funnel. Somebody has to get targets here. And it was actually Strange against the Packers on Sunday getting involved. I think Evan Ingram will get 12 targets a game now, but Strange could be at least on the radar in 2 tight end leagues. Got time for a couple defense streamers?
Yeah, a couple of options, really. I think you could either go Titans Patriots on either side of that. That's going to be the lowest over-under of the whole season to that date. I think that's one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I saw those on the list, and they were even ranked higher than the ones in a couple of lists than the ones that I'm going to throw out there. But I can't pick them up. I can't.
It's not a fun thing to do. You're not like, I can't wait, because you're not watching that game.
Yeah,
you're
dropping them immediately afterwards. Where at least if you get someone like the Saints and they get some momentum going, they're at Carolina. They're only 33% rostered. Carolina's banged up, trading players away. It's not a good situation there. And then the Bengals at 31%. They were awful to begin the season, but they've made some strides. Either that or the schedule's just gotten a little bit easier. But the schedule's going to work in their favor again here this week. They're 31% rostered, and they're actually the home team, which I like, playing the Las Vegas Raiders here. So those
Can I ask you
matchups.
One strategy question that I had to deal with that I know you're going to hate? So Steelers, 49ers, both on bye. Let's just say in this case the Steelers defense. Would you, for this week, roster 2 defenses before throwing the Steelers into waiver wire?
Actually, yes, I would this week. I would hate doing it.
But, I know.
If I could at all possibly do that. I mean, there's a situation where I would not pick up a defense and start the Steelers on bye before I was picking up the Patriots to get me 2 or 3 fantasy points and hope for the best. But the Steelers, just because of TJ Watt and his tremendous playmaking ability, you have to keep them around. And, the Niners defense maybe isn't on the same tier, but they were the preseason number 1, right? So, like, there's something there. They're better, if you get through the bye. I could see a situation if you hung on to them too.
I know you hate doing that, but I have effectively done that in one of our NFFC leagues that we share.
But the thing is if you have a defense, like if you stumbled upon Denver this year and you get to a bye week, you're gonna have to do it. I start most seasons streaming and taking based on the week 1 matchup and go from there. But I do also like finally eventually settling into one. So yes, I think you misunderstand me sometimes, because what I don't like doing is rostering a second defense based on a matchup a week into the future. That's one thing I won't do, because there will always be somebody else that's not going to make me not do that roster spot. But if you have to preserve a good defense and roster 2 defenses to do it, I'm fine. I guess I can live with that.
I'm also doing that for Chris Boswell, the kicker for the Steelers too, who's been just a 10-plus point machine the past couple of weeks. Same concept. Now, in one league, I have the Steelers defense and Chris Boswell. I don't have enough roster spots to do both, but yeah, I'm dropping Chris Boswell in that instance, because I think there is more kickers that you can confidently say it can. The Austin Seibert is available in a few. The Commanders kicker has been insane in the Commanders offense.
Tampa Bay kicker McLaughlin, I think might be below our threshold too. I see that come up in a couple spots. So
yeah. All right. Well, that does it for us in the Week 9 edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. For us, brought to you by Underdog. Next week, I was wrong about this. Next week is trade deadline week, so we'll see. I feel like a lot of the moves, DeAndre Hopkins, Deontay Johnson, a couple of the receivers, Mark Cooper and the like, have already been traded, but we'll have to see. We'll be going live next week around the trade deadline period, at least the end of it, and keeping you up to date. But again, receiver heavy. We had our top 5 list earlier at the show. You could go back and listen to that if you want. But again, thanks everyone for listening to this edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast.